Have you ever laughed at a cruel joke just to fit in? Throughout my life, I've done that on several occasions. There were even times when the jokes I laughed at were gay jokes. Jokes about people like me. Of course, if you were a teenager who experienced the feelings I did, you found yourself doing all kinds of stupid things to be closer to the guys around you. Back then, when I found myself in situations where my friends were making gay jokes, I knew I couldn't risk doing anything that would alienate me from them, especially since they already felt so distant from me. So, in order to fit in, to be one of the guys, I would make gay jokes too, even if the jokes were disrespectful, insensitive, or heartless. I harmed myself to keep myself safe. And it wasn't just me and my friends who made these jokes. I heard these kinds of jokes all my life from my father, my siblings, and even sometimes from clergy. Of course, I know now that most of the time these jokes weren't intended to make fun of homosexuals, but instead were used to establish a sense of security between the people who used them. Growing up, the guys I was around would often make gay jokes as a way to break the ice or as a sign of affection for one another. But what those guys didn't know was that I struggled with homosexuality. And because of this, the cost of their brotherhood was my exile. These jokes were a constant reminder that I could only be counted as one of the guys if I was straight. There were also times when they used the term gay to signify an activity or behavior which they considered unmanly or weak. You're in choir? Dude, that's so gay. The consequence of this was that kids like me who heard this talk got the impression that because the label gay fit us too, we were the inheritors of everything the world saw as undesirable and worthy of contempt, even if those things had nothing to do with sexuality. And we had to bear that weight every day. If the people saying these things had known there was someone in the room with them that they were harming, of course they would have stopped. But in my experience, behind closed doors, whether they intended the harm or not, they often would continue to make a joke of people who struggled with their sexuality. I know that much of this behavior was inherited from our parents and our parents' parents and so on. It was behavior that was never corrected. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Today, thankfully, the Catholic Church is very clear about how its members are to treat those who experience homosexual desires. The Catechism of the Catholic Church clearly states that people with these dispositions must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Let's see if we can dig into these words a bit and see what they mean. When we hear the term respect, we likely associate it with admiration or perhaps some kind of gratitude. But if we look at the roots of the word, we discover that it means something a little different. The term respect comes from the Latin terms re and spectare. Spectare means to look, and re means again. So the most basic meaning of the word is to look again at another. And some would say to look again and again. Many of those who struggle like me are not seen by Christians. They take one look at us and intentionally never look again. They don't look at the hurt, at the fear, or the good hidden underneath. I've been guilty of this too. Usually the trouble is we think we know people and we really don't know them at all. Often we don't like the first look when we look at people, and so that's it. We look once, conclude we don't like them, and then decide that for whatever reason, maybe because of the color of their hair, or because of their tattoos, or their weight, or maybe because they disagree with us politically, or because they've offended us, that this person is only what we see and no more. Or if there is more, that's someone else's problem. We simply do not look again. But as Catholics, we can't justify this deficiency in behavior, because when we do this, we overlook the most important part of the other. We miss the dignity of the human being, God's image, its dignity and worth, which is always there. But our vision is so clouded, and it becomes difficult to see or recognize it. So we must look back again and again to find it and remind ourselves that it is there. But merely seeing isn't enough. It is only once we are aware of another that we can begin to intentionally be sensitive to them. If someone is sensitive to touch, it means they easily experience the existence of another thing through their skin. And if someone has a sensitive nose, it means that they are easily able to experience the existence of a thing by its scent. But in being sensitive to those who experience homosexual desires, what we are being sensitive to is a whole human person, body and soul. So in order to be fully sensitive to them, to experience the good of them, we must use the whole of our person. Just as we need to open our eyes before we can see, in order to perceive the other for who they are, all of our senses, body and soul, must be open and willing to perceive them. This may sound intense, but following Christ is supposed to be intense. Love is intense. And the whole purpose of looking again at the other and being sensitive to the other is to love them better. But how can we come to do the good for another, to love them, if we are not sensitive to the goods they need? This is why all Christians need the virtues of respect and sensitivity. Through the combination of the two arises the opportunity for intimacy. And it is only through intimacy that we can practice a greater love, and by which some degree of compassion can be shown to the other. And compassion will very likely be needed, because homosexuality often constitutes a trial for those who experience its weight. The term compassion comes from the Latin compassio, which means to suffer with. Perhaps the least needs to be said about this virtue, since we all know what it's like to see someone we love suffer, or to be comforted by someone when we ourselves are suffering. But at the same time, this virtue can be difficult to practice if the suffering we observe is foreign to us. In these cases, there are two ways in which we can nurture this virtue. The first way is by becoming more familiar with the particular suffering. We can do this, provided it's prudent, by asking the one suffering to help us understand their suffering. They may have a very clear insight into themselves and may be able to help us understand both their pain and how we can help alleviate it. But depending on our relationship to the person, they may not be able to do this easily. It can be difficult to explain our hurt to those who are somehow a part of it. Alternatively, we can look to the witness of the others who are able to articulate their experience with that hurt. Of course, each suffering is unique, and we can never know if our pain is identical to the pain of another. But we can often find many similarities to our particular experiences, and these similarities are usually useful. One book which was of great help to me in understanding my suffering was the book Spiritual Friendship by Wesley Hill. It's not a perfect book by any means, but if you're a Christian who struggles with homosexuality or know someone who does, I highly recommend you read it. It made me confident that I wasn't alone. Secondly, and much more importantly, one of the most excellent ways we can nurture and show compassion for another is simply by remaining with them. It is not good for man to be alone, and much less so when he is suffering. The experience of struggling with LGBT desires is usually one of isolation and alienation. So when people like me perceive that we have a helper who is committed to remaining with us to the end, who's willing to walk with us into Mordor, it gives us hope and eases our suffering. Even if the other doesn't feel the true weight of our burden. It doesn't get much more Christ-like than that, to suffer with another, for another. Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. This is what the Catholic Church expects of its members. This is what accompaniment looks like. When we hear this, if we find that we are expecting compassion to be different, to somehow be free of any hurt for ourselves, then that means we have the wrong idea about compassion and love. Active love is labor and perseverance. The Catechism states that people who experience homosexuality must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. But all this respect, compassion, and sensitivity is contingent on acceptance. Of course, when the Church speaks of acceptance here, she in no way means accepting or affirming sin. Rather, we Catholics are being called here to accept the teaching and the person. We can choose to do that willingly, unwillingly, or not at all. Both the people and the teaching are gifts to be accepted or rejected. To lovingly accept the gift of those who struggle with their sexuality is to accept the call of the Church. And the degree to which we reject them is the degree to which we reject the Church. How Catholics respond to those who struggle with their sexuality will be evidence of our charity, and in this way, evidence of Christ. But if Catholics do not accept homosexuals with respect, sensitivity, and compassion, then the world will come to believe that neither does our God. Of course, refusing to say slurs and make gay jokes is just a small part of this, but it's not a bad place to start. If you're out there watching this video and you struggle with your sexuality like me, and you've been wounded by the way Christians around you talk about people like you, I would ask you not to blame the Church for their behavior. The same way it wouldn't be right for us to judge a sport or game by the people who don't play by the rules, it's not right for us to judge the church by the people who don't follow its teachings. Keep in mind that there are a lot of hurt and misguided people out there who call themselves Catholic, who sometimes need just as much respect, sensitivity, and compassion as we do, if not more. Until next time, I'm Aaron Brown. I love you very much. And take heart. Don't let yourself be satisfied with anything less than the greater love. Hey there. I'm so happy you took the time to watch this video. If you liked it, please be sure to click subscribe, like, turn on notifications so you know when our next video comes out, and please consider sharing the video. And if you believe that what we're doing here is worthwhile and that there should be more content like this out there, then please support us at greaterlove.locals.com. The more support we get from people like you, the more videos like this we'll be able to produce. But most of all, please support us with your prayers, that God may give us the wisdom, prudence, and courage we need to spread the truth. See you in the next one.